Our second speaker is Khalid Bomba. Khalid should be very well known to all of us here around in Washington, around the world. He is the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of the Ethiopian Agricultural Transformation Agency. The agency is an initiative of the government of Ethiopia. It is established by federal regulation to promote agriculture sector transformation in Ethiopia. And already in the very short time it has been in operation, it is a source of inspiration to many of those who are looking across Africa, how it is operating, what can we learn from it. Khalid, we are looking forward to hearing from you about ATA's vision to transform agriculture in Africa. Looking forward to hear from you from nuggets of wisdom, some of the early challenges, early successes, some lessons as others in Africa look to emulate the experience of ATA in Ethiopia. Welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. And let me first say what a pleasure it is for me to be here with IFPRI colleagues and others in the Washington community. I have a PowerPoint presentation that probably has far too much detail in it, so I won't go through the PowerPoint in excruciating detail, but I'll try to highlight some of the key points in each slide, and then hopefully we'll make the PowerPoint available for others to see in the future. First is to say that ATA is a relatively new organization. We've only been operational for about 2 years, but there was about a 2-year process that led to the creation of the organization that began with a conversation between the late Prime Minister Meles and Melinda Gates, where Prime Minister Meles asked for the Gates Foundation to do a diagnostic on the extension system of the country, where Ethiopia had invested a significant amount of money, but had not seen the kinds of results that it was hoping for. And the Gates Foundation reached out to IFPRI and McKinsey and asked for support in doing that kind of work. That first diagnostic on extension led to a series of other diagnostic reports on other parts of the agricultural sector. In total, there were 8 different diagnostics done, from the seed system, to the soil system, to the agricultural finance system. But when we did, I was at the Gates Foundation at the time, and when we did those diagnostics, we realized that recommendations coming out of them were far too great for any government, let alone one as constrained as Ethiopia, to implement, given the existing structures. So we looked across the world to see how transformation was brought about in other countries, particularly in Asia, and found that in most of those instances, there was a unique organization set up to drive and catalyze transformation. So a recommendation was made in September of 2010, right around this time during the UN General Assembly meeting by the Foundation to Prime Minister Meles to create what the Koreans called their accelerator. Prime Minister Meles and the government of Ethiopia decided that this was a good idea, and almost in record time, in 3 months, passed a resolution within the cabinet to set up the ATA. And after about 8 months of designing the organization became operational in August of 2011. This is just to show that there's a lot of thinking that went behind the design of the ATA to make sure that it was fit for purpose for Ethiopia's context. And when other countries ask us, how could we replicate the ATA, the Ethiopian ATA in those countries, we tell them, think about the function of the ATA rather than the form. What kinds of things are we doing, and how do you create that kind of function within your own countries, rather than just creating the form of an organization like ATA in those countries? And as the slide here indicates, we are an organization that is continually evolving and learning. This is a big part of the flexibility that was built into the design of the organization, because, as you'll see on the next slide, actually it'll come up in a second, ATA is not an organization that is meant to exist forever. It is meant to exist only for about 15 to 20 years to catalyze the change, build the capacity of other partners, and then cease to exist. And as a result, that evolution is critically important so that we can address the needs of the sector as it evolves, rather than having a one-size-fits-all during the existence of the ATA. Now, this next slide talks about how the ATA was created to address 2 broad issues. One is the lack of capacity to come up with specifically designed solutions to key parts of the agricultural sector. Similar to the design of the ATA, what we found was that there was a lack of capacity within the country to think about the key systemic bottlenecks, be it in the seed sector, in the soil sector, or any part of the agricultural sector, and to design specific solutions to address them. And then to continually refine those solutions as things change. And the second, as many of you who worked in Ethiopia know, is that there are plenty of strategies and visions and policies in Ethiopia that are well designed. What's lacking in many instances is the capacity to implement them. So this was the second part of our mandate as ATA, is how do you support the implementation of these policies that are uniquely designed to address the Ethiopian context? Now, this is a slide that probably has far too much detail, but what it illustrates is that ATA has a very clear mandate. That mandate is to serve those two purposes that I just talked about: to create uniquely crafted strategies to address key parts of the agricultural system, and second, to help the partners in implementing those solutions. ATA is not an implementing organization. We are a supporting organization, a catalytic organization. And even in that effort, there are three specific pillars to the work that we do that define how we execute our mandate. The first is to say that we work on specific program areas. We don't try to solve every problem in the agricultural sector. There are some key areas of the sector that we focus on. Second is that even within those areas, we have some specific functions that we take responsibility for, and implementation is not one of them. And then lastly, it's how do we work with our partners? We are one small piece of the solution. We catalyze, but ultimately the heavy lifting and the work gets done by our other partners, be they public sector, private sector, or civil society organizations. And underlying all of that is an organization that we're building. This is not a project, this is not a program, this is an organization. And as a result, there are different challenges in building an organization from those in running a project. And those are the kinds of things that we've had to think through over the past couple of years of how do you build an organization while at the same time delivering results on the ground. Now, this organization, as I indicated, is only meant to be around for a specific period of time, get a job done, and then cease to exist. And even that period of time, we've thought hard about what does that look like? And we've segmented into three specific chunks of time, each lasting for about 5 to 7 years, where we have specific responsibilities during each phase. What we're supposed to do, what we hope our partners do, and what we hope to achieve that signals the beginning of the next phase of ATA's life. Now, the other point to highlight is that all of what we do is linked to Ethiopia's broad agricultural and economic development strategies and to the CAADP compact that Ethiopia has signed on to. So this is part of a solution and not just agricultural specific. It is part of the overall economic development plan of the government of Ethiopia. More specifically, in terms of the things that we work on, there are specific crop value chains that we focus on in the initial years, 2013, 2014, primarily the food security crops of teff, wheat, and maize. But we'll begin working on coffee, sorghum, and livestock next year. There are specific systems, the building blocks of these value chains, such as seed systems, soil, research, extension, that we also work on. There are cross-cutting initiatives that inform and strengthen the work in these different two broad program areas, things like gender, technology, and climate. And there are some special projects, such as a public-private partnership team that we have just started last year to support the work around the G8 and New Alliance work that we're doing. Now, all these four areas come together in specific geographies. Although we are a national organization, we can't work throughout the entire country as well. So we've identified key high potential areas of the country where each one of these things come together in an integrated way to form a solution space for our smallholder farmers. Now, every single one of our program areas also goes through a very meticulous process of 2 phases, where the first phase is working with our partners, public, private, civil society partners, to define exactly what the roadmap and the strategy should be for strengthening, for example, the seed sector. But that doesn't happen in isolation. While we're developing these strategies, we're also doing activities on the ground to learn from doing, to learn which areas should we be prioritizing over other areas. Once we've kind of learned and we've developed a strategy, we then go to what is called phase 2, where it's about implementation of those strategies and supporting the implementation, supporting our partners to implement these strategies, but also giving them support when it comes to the analytical capacity to problem solve, and not to be fixated on strategies that you develop today because the ground might change in 2 years' time. So we have an analytical team that's constantly looking at updating the strategies that have been developed in the past. The second part of what we do, the how, is really centered around 4 key principles. The first is problem solving. And that problem solving is evidence-based problem solving to understand what's happening on the ground, the reality for the smallholder farmer, and then developing strategies to address those problems. The second is implementation support. Once you know what needs to be done, you can't just leave it to people and say, okay, go ahead and do this. There are many challenges that our implementing partners face on the ground. So we work very closely with them to identify what are those challenges. Is it capacity? Is it finance? Is it logistics? And then how do we solve it? Who is the right partner to put them in touch with? While we're doing that, however, there is a capacity building component. And this is to ensure that we work ourselves out of a job. And then finally, a big part of what we do is coordination. Coordination within the sector and then across sectors. Because agriculture is not just in a country like Ethiopia, agriculture is not just the responsibility of the Ministry of Agriculture. The Ministry of Finance needs to be involved. The Ministry of Trade needs to be involved. The Ministry of Industry. The Ministry of Roads needs to be involved. So all these pieces are things that we try to bring together. Now, this is the list of the different things that we are working on. There are 110 different things that are part of Ethiopia's transformation agenda. They're broken into the key program areas that I talked about: seeds, soils, teff, wheat, and maize. And they're broken into priority deliverables and other deliverables. The priority deliverables, there's 30 of them. Other deliverables, there are 80. We did not come up with these. The stakeholders in the sector came up with these. What we've tried to do is help the stakeholders to prioritize them and to create realistic milestones for these priorities. So I will send these out and you'll see exactly how detailed they are. But suffice it to say that we're not going to achieve all of them. But what we do is we track our progress. On a quarterly basis, we report to the Prime Minister the progress that we're making on each and every one of these deliverables. And we have specific organizations that are responsible for each one and specific milestones that they have indicated that they will hit on a quarterly basis, and we report on those. Now, let me give you, just from an illustrative point of view, 4 specific examples of the kinds of things that we're working on. One is in the seed sector. As some of you might know, the distribution of seed in Ethiopia has traditionally happened through one channel and one channel only, which is the cooperative sector. Now, as you can imagine, that doesn't create a lot of competition. It doesn't create a lot of incentive for the cooperatives to be as efficient as they could be. So over the past year, we've made the case to the government of Ethiopia that we should look at different ways of creating competition and increasing the capacity of different partners, particularly private sector partners, to be engaged in the distribution of seed. And over the past year, we've done a pilot in 33 waredas, or counties, in looking at different ways of doing direct seed marketing, with some success, to the extent that next year, this is going to be scaled up from 33 waredas to over 70 waredas, covering most of the high potential wheat and maize waredas. And as you can see from the slide, there are lots of benefits that we have shown the government when it comes to using this kind of direct seed marketing effort that creates competition, but also real-time delivery of seeds to delivery channels when they need it, rather than having the central government dictating how much seed should go to each and every county. This has created less carryover stock and has created a mechanism whereby farmers have choice. Now, the second example that I'd highlight in terms of the work we're doing is in the soil sector. For the past 30 years, Ethiopia's farmers have had access only to two types of fertilizer, DAP and urea. And no matter your agroecology, no matter the crop you're growing, the recommendation has been that you use 100 kgs of DAP and 100 kgs of urea. Now, as you can imagine, over time, the soil becomes less responsive. Over time, there are different nutrients that are going to be needed for different types of agroecology and different crops. So we've been working with the African Soil Information System based in Arusha to do a detailed soil mapping of the entire country that looks at latitude, 1 degree latitude and 1 degree longitude points and takes soil samples from them. And this will be done in a period of 2 years. Ethiopia will be the largest country to ever do this. So we're leading this effort, working with a national soil testing laboratory. Now, we've also gone one step deeper and said, beyond a national soil map, how do you get to the county level and determine what is needed? What are the nutrients that are missing? So for 152 waredas or counties, we've done very detailed soil fertility maps that show you exactly how much potassium, how much nitrogen, how much boron, how much sulfur is in the soil and what's required, and then came up with tentative fertilizer blend recommendations. Going one step further than that, we're also working with cooperatives in Ethiopia to do blending in country for the formulas that we've identified. So all of a sudden, we're going from imported DAP and urea with one recommendation all around the country to detailed soil maps and blending facilities within Ethiopia, blending farmers for local communities. A third example of what we're doing is in the wheat value chain. As you'll see here, we're working this year with 400,000 farmers, wheat farmers in the highest producing wheat areas of the country, in an integrated way to provide them with inputs, with agronomic practices, with mechanization, with access to markets and access to finance. All of these being delivered simultaneously, not by ATA, but by different partners, and having an off-taker at the end of this so that farmers have access to the markets. And then finally, working with the G8 New Alliance, the public-private partnership team at ATA is working to promote private sector investment into the agricultural sector, specifically on post-harvest processing and value addition. So 3 specific opportunities that we've been promoting that have gained some traction are in the chickpea processing, malt barley, and sesame hulling area, all of which have now identified a particular investor that's ready to put money on the ground. In addition, when you look at the last year and a half, our PPP team has been working with different partners not only to get letters of intent signed, but also MOUs and activities on the ground. And that's grown from 15 letters of intent and 4 activities on the ground in May of last year to 15 specific investors working on the ground and 28 letters of intent just in the past 18 months. Finally, in a place like IFPRI, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the metrics for success and how do we think about measuring our success. And for us, we measure success on 3 levels. First is at an organizational level. How are we doing as an organization? As I mentioned earlier, this is not a project. So we've got to think about, are we building a strong, viable organization that's contributing to Ethiopia's success? The second is, how is that organization contributing to that success? What kinds of strategies are we developing? Are those strategies really being taken up by our partners? And then finally, how are those strategies that are being taken up by our partners affecting our smallholder farmers who are ultimately our clients? And what are we learning from this? Now, it's also important for us as an organization to continue to learn so that we can evolve in the right direction. And that forces us to be honest about what's working and what's not. And there are 3 broad areas that we're always thinking about in terms of our learning, in terms of improving. The first is our operational performance and the fact that we have a hybrid staffing model where people like myself from the Ethiopian diaspora and international staff working within our organization will phase out over time. So how are we doing that? How are we building the capacity of local staff to take over for us in 3 to 5 years? How are we thinking about managing that growth? Although we're only a 2-year-old organization, we have over 200 staff. So going from 0 to 200 in 2 years is not an easy thing to do. And building the systems and processes to allow us to function effectively while we're growing. We've also got to think about the programmatic challenges that we face. Things about how quickly do we move towards the solution and how consultative do we need to be. How much opportunistic opportunities do we really go after, and how do we become more strategic in our work and the balance between the two? And then finally, there are strategic questions of how we engage with our Transformation Council or our board, the kind of support that we're getting from the Prime Minister and other policymakers, the kind of relationship we have with our implementing partners, and finally, managing the expectations of the many partners that we have, be it development partners and ultimately our farmers, and what is it that is realistic to achieve in the short period of time that we have been operational and that we hope to be operational. I think this is the last slide, but it just talks about the accountability mechanisms that we have and how do we leverage them to make change and impact. We have a reporting structure, given the fact that we are a government organization that reports through government. We report to a board that the Prime Minister chairs, which allows us to have a lot of leverage in terms of getting things done and getting direction through the government system. But at the same time, we recognize that the Ministry of Agriculture is ultimately responsible for the agricultural sector. So we have to be working lock in step with them to make sure that we're perfectly aligned. And then finally, we are ultimately accountable to smallholder farmers. So how do we ensure that we include their voice, their needs, and their demands into the equation where we work? Thank you very much.